Welcome to Magnificat TV news program dedicated to providing news from the Church. Today is Wednesday, July 12, 2023, and these are our headlines. The Vatican has made public the list of those who will participate in the Synod on Synodality, where for the first time lay people will have the right to vote. The Pope has announced the creation of 21 new cardinals, 17 of whom will have the right to vote. Among them is Monsignor Victor Manuel Fernandez. The Pope has received in audience former U.S. President Bill Clinton and the son of the heir of pro-abortion billionaire George Soros. Monsignor Alvarez was released for a few hours, but as he continued to refuse to leave Nicaragua, he was imprisoned again. The Pope has granted a plenary indulgence for the celebration of the World Grandparents' Day, which will take place this year on the 23rd of July. The list of participants in the Synod of Synodality is now known. The major novelty is that there will be lay people who will have the same voting rights as the bishops.
The lists of participants in the first session of the 16th Ordinary General Assembly of the Synod of Bishops, to be held from 4 to 29 October 2023, was presented on Friday at the Holy See Press Office. The assembly will be composed of a total of 363 members with voting rights. Of these, 85 are women, 54 of whom have the right to vote. There are 20 representatives from the Eastern churches, 43 bishops from Africa, 47 from America, 25 from Asia, 48 from Europe, 5 from Oceania, 1 without an episcopal conference. The Jesuit James Martin, the visible head of the LGBT lobby within the Church in favor of changing the Catholic faith and morals on homosexuality, has been one of those personally chosen by the Pope to participate in the 16th Ordinary General Assembly of the Synod of Bishops. Cardinal Muller and the more liberal cardinals from the United States have also been invited. Many of the participants come on the basis of their institutional position: Eastern Patriarchs, presidents of international organizations of bishops or religious. Others have been selected by the bishops' conferences. Others are part of the Roman Curia and various other bodies.
The Pope has announced the creation of 21 new cardinals, 17 of them with voting rights. The consistory will take place on the 30th of September.
In the quota reserved for the Vatican Curia are the prefects of bishops, Monsignor Provost, the prefects of the Oriental Churches, Monsignor Gugerotti, and the prefect of the Doctrine of the Faith, Monsignor Fernandez. There are 2 apostolic nuncios, the Latin Patriarch of Jerusalem, the Archbishop of Cape Town, the Jesuit Archbishop of Cordoba, Argentina, the Archbishop of Bogota, the Archbishop of Lodz, the Archbishop of Juba, the Archbishop of Madrid, the Coadjutor Archbishop of Tabora, the Bishop of Penang, the Jesuit Bishop of Hong Kong, the Bishop of Ajaccio, the Auxiliary Bishop of Lisbon, and the Rector Major of the Salesians, an Apostolic Nuncio, an Archbishop Emeritus of Venezuela, and the Capuchin Confessor of the Shrine of Our Lady of Pompeii in Buenos Aires were appointed as cardinals without the right to vote because they are over 80 years old. It is striking that neither the new Archbishop of Buenos Aires nor the new Archbishop of Brussels was made a cardinal, while the new Archbishop of Madrid was.
The son of a pro-abortion billionaire, George Soros, has been received by the Pope. He was accompanied by a former U.S. President, Bill Clinton.
It was not announced, nor has the Vatican given any explanation for a private audience that intrigued many, none other than former President Bill Clinton and Alexander Soros, recently anointed as heir of his father's empire. All that has been officially reported is that they spoke of peace. Since his recent release from hospital, the Pope has cancelled public audiences, but not private ones, such as this one, which took place without prior notice from the Vatican Press Office. And yet, those summoned are anything but private individuals unknown to the public. Bill Clinton and the heir to George Soros' empire, his son Alexander. Both characters, moreover, have been the protagonists of strenuous social engineering efforts on the national Clinton's case and planetary Soros case, scaled in an aggressively anti-Christian direction, promoting abortion, birth reduction, and gender ideology in a timely and untimely fashion. Soros Open Society Foundation, its affiliates and allied groups have founded efforts to legalize abortion in Ireland, Poland, Mexico, and other traditionally Catholic countries. The Soros Network has also funded efforts to change the political priorities of American Catholics and pass pro-abortion legislation.
Monsignor Alvarez, the bishop imprisoned by Nicaragua's dictator Ortega, was released for a few hours, but when he refused to leave the country, he was imprisoned again.
It has been confirmed that the Nicaraguan bishop Rolando Alvarez, sentenced by Daniel Ortega's dictatorship to 26 years in prison for treason, was briefly released but was subsequently returned to prison because of his refusal to leave Nicaragua. The bishop of Matagalpa was released from the Modelo prison while negotiations for his final release and exile in Rome took place in coordination between the Ortega government, a Vatican representative, and Alvarez himself. However, Alvarez refused to leave the country and decided to return to prison. This is the second time that Rolando Alvarez has refused to be transferred out of the country. The first occasion occurred in February when the Ortega regime ordered the release and exile of 220 political prisoners. On that occasion, the bishop chose not to leave prison and a few days later was sentenced to more than 26 years in prison. Monsignor Rolando Alvarez does not want to leave Nicaragua. He wants to be free, without conditions, in his country. Honduran Bishop Jose Antonio Canales, who has been following his colleague's situation, said on his social network, Monsignor Alvarez is being held in prison in inhumane conditions. He is isolated in a cell measuring 2 to 2.5 meters without any ventilation, which means that he must continually endure suffocating heat due to Nicaragua's climate.
On the 23rd of July, it would be possible to gain a plenary indulgence on the occasion of the celebration of World Grandparents' Day by fulfilling the conditions established by the Church.
On 23 July this year, the Third World Day of Grandparents and the Elderly will be celebrated, which will be presided over by Pope Francis from St. Peter's Basilica. The Holy See has issued a communique to make public the decree of the Apostolic Penitentiary that will be granted to all participants of this celebration. It also explains that it can be given as a suffrage to the souls in purgatory, as well as to the faithful who dedicate their time to visiting and caring for elderly brothers and sisters in need or in difficulty. The action of praying the rosary is another way of obtaining the indulgence. It explains that the indulgence can be obtained provided that they rid themselves of any sin and intend to fulfill the usual conditions: confession, communion, recitation of the creed, and prayer for the Pope as soon as possible. The Catechism of the Catholic Church and the Code of Canon Law define plenary indulgence as the remission before God of the temporal punishment of sins, which means that the passage through purgatory is avoided.
Our editorial this week is devoted to commenting on the appointment of the new prefect of the Doctrine of the Faith and the situation of Monsignor Alvarez in Nicaragua.
On Saturday, the Pope made public the appointment of the new prefect of the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith, Monsignor Victor Manuel Fernandez, Archbishop of the Argentine city of La Plata, and one of the people close to the Pope. None of the appointments made by the Pontific in these years of governing the Church has caused such an uproar and raised so many criticism as this one. Those objections are centered on 2 points. On the one hand, the person chosen, and on the other hand, the letter with which the Pope made the appointment public, and where he explains to the new prefect what he expects from his disposition and how the doctrine of the faith has to act from now on. For many, it is a refoundation of this very important Vatican congregation. The objections regarding the person of Monsignor Victor Manuel Fernandez have focused on 3 points. On the one hand, his attitude and behavior in cases of sexual abuse, specifically a case de cause in the Diocese of La Plata while he was Archbishop. A North American organization, Bishop Accountably, has accused him of not having attended the victims correctly and not having paid attention to them. The abuser priest committed suicide shortly before being arrested by the police. The diocese has issued a statement saying that Monsignor Fernandez did attend and give credit to the victims, but that if he did not act by opening a canonical trial against the priest, it was because he didn't have time, such the priest committed suicide. Well, that is a question that remains there, that remains open, and I don't know if in the future it will have or not any impact. The other matter refers to the one of the books published by the Archbishop many years ago when he was a young priest. The book is entitled The Art of Kissing, Heal Me with Your Mouth. The bishop has also defended himself by saying, first, that it was a book he wrote in his youth, and above all, that he wrote it to help young people to find other ways to express their affection without falling into prematrimonial sex. That this was the cause. That is to say, well, you can express your affections to the other person with a kiss and not by sleeping with her. This is what the bishop has said, and he also adds that he has written a lot of other books and that it seems unfair that the attention has been fixed only on that work, a work of his youth. For example, he has written a book entitled The 5 Minutes with the Holy Spirit, which is a bestseller, a short book of spirituality, but nevertheless, it is still being published, and it has done and continues to do good to many people to help them to get closer to God, and in this particular case, to the Holy Spirit. Those are 2 of the objections made to him. Perhaps the most serious objections are related to his theological opinions, especially starting with the one of them, the one in which he once affirmed that the position of the Vicar of Christ, the successor of St. Peter, is not linked, does not have to be linked to the Bishop of Rome. And this is an affirmation that Cardinal Mueller, former prefect of the Doctrine of the Faith, has recalled that it is a heretical affirmation. Moreover, in a homily on March 5th, Monsignor Fernandez denounced that the Church, these are his words, has woven, and a whole philosophy and a morality full of classifications, a way of classifying people, of labeling them. This one is like this one is like that, this one can receive communion, this one cannot, this one can be forgiven, and this one cannot be forgiven, referring without saying explicitly to those people who can receive neither confession or communion because they are not married in their church and are living as a husband and wife, having sexual relations between them, regardless of whatever they are homosexual or heterosexual. Well, this is naturally goes against the teachings of the church, and this is an opinion that the bishop did not make explicit what he was referring to, but what could imply that he could be in favor of admitting confession and communion of persons who for whatever circumstances would not be married in the church. It is an interpretation. It is not something he said explicitly, but it is one of the things that those who have criticized him have not recalled. On the same subject, he wrote an article in the magazine Theology of the Catholic University of Buenos Aires. In this article, he justified the use of condoms in those cases in which one of the two members of the couple, the man, for example, was not willing, was unable, or did not want to practice sexual abstinence, which is linked to the application of the use of natural means of birth control. Then, to avoid the breakup of marriage, charity will lead the use of condoms in order to avoid a greater evil, such as the breakup of the marriage. Well, this is some of the objections that this week have been made public against him, and from which he ran into, as I said, in the case of the book, has defended himself. As for the letter with which the Pope accompanies the appointment of Monsignor Fernandez, it is made clear that the Pontiff wants a profound change in the way in which the dicastery of the doctrine of the faith must carry out his mission, and even in the content of the same mission. It surprised and hurt some people when the Pope said that, quote, the dicastery that you will preside over come to use in moral methods in other times, end quote, not specifying to which era he was referring. It could be, though, that he was accusing the predecessor of Monsignor Fernandez, Monsignor Ladaria, or even Pope Benedict XVI, who for so many years presided over the doctrine of the faith. It was Monsignor Fernandez himself who in an interview clarified and said that the Pope was referring to the time of the Inquisition, in which he explained the context and everything else, but he also said that indeed things had been carried out at the time that were not right, such as some counted cases of torture. In the Pope's letter, it is also said that in those times, rather than promoting theological knowledge, possible doctrine errors were persecuted. What I expect from you is certainly something very different. Now, in the new doctrine of the faith, doctrine errors will not be persecuted, or at least that can be deduced from these words of the Pope, and that time errors were persecuted. What I expect from you is something very different. Next, the Pope clarifies what he expects from the new doctrine of the faith. The Holy Father says, quote, the Church needs to grow in her interpretation of the revealed word and in her understanding of the truth, without this implying the imposition of a single way of expressing it, because the different lines of philosophical, theological, and pastoral thought, if they allow themselves to be harmonized by the Holy Spirit in respect and love, can also make the Church grow. This harmonious growth. End quote, says the Pope. Quote, will perceive Christians' doctrine more efficiently than any mechanism of control. It is good that your task expresses that the Church encourage the charism of theologians and their effort for theological research, providing that they are not content with the desk theology, with the cold and hard logic that seeks to dominate everything. End quote. So much for the Pope's words, which are open to all kinds of interpretations. In fact, some have interpreted them as a refoundation of the dicastery, more along the lines of the International Theological Commission or the Pontifical Biblical Commission, in which the exchange of opinion among theologians is encouraged, rather than that of the dicastery, as it has been until now, dedicated to defending the faith. Will this new doctrine of the faith have reserved to defend the divinity of Christ against Arius, or to defend the Catholic faith against Luther? However, also this week something else has happened, and it seems to me significant and providential that it has happened just in these days. An Italian theologian specialized in moral theology, Martin Linder, has been rejected by the Vatican to occupy the position of dean of the Faculty of Philosophy and Theology, a diocese in northern Italy. The reason for this rejection is because his theologian in some of his expressions defends the blessing of homosexual couples. Because of his teaching, the Vatican has voted his appointment as dean. The reaction has been very strong. More than 100 theologians have expressed their solidarity with him and have again accused the Holy See for everything. The question is, who was behind this prohibition? Perhaps some rigid person who is still hidden in some Vatican dicastery? The prohibition comes from the dicastery for Catholic culture and education. At the head of that dicastery is the Portuguese Cardinal Tolentino, who is probably one of the most liberal cardinals there is in the Vatican. And yet, Tolentino's dicastery has prohibited this theologian, who is in favor of the blessing of homosexual couples, from holding the position of dean in this faculty of theology. It seems significant to me, and perhaps it can give us a clue as to what may happen in the future also with the doctrine of the faith, because perhaps one thing is what one could like to do, and another thing is what one has to do when times come to make decisions. In any case, time will tell. Time will tell what the doctrine of the faith will do in the future when cases arise, as has just happened with this Italian theologian in favor of the blessing of homosexual couples. A third piece of news this week, terrible, very painful, has been what has happened to the Nicaraguan Bishop Monsignor Alvarez. Monsignor Alvarez, Bishop of Matagalpa, was in prison, accused by the treason, sentenced to 26 years in jail, an absurd accusation, simply because he defended the freedom of Nicaraguan people. They offered him deportation, that he could go to the United States and nothing else could happen to him there, or else, if he preferred to stay in his country, they will put him in jail. They have kept him in jail for more than 3 months now, in an isolated room, closed, without any ventilation, a room of 2 by 2.5 meters. Can anyone imagine the suffering of this man? Can anyone imagine the horror of being in the room without air conditioning, without a window, in a country as hot as Nicaragua? It is real torture. Well, this week in a process that it is still not completely clear, it seems that they have taken him out of the torture, out of the room. I don't say red hot, but also they have taken him out. They have taken him to the Episcopal Conference And it seems that with the presence of some Vatican authorities, they have offered him again the possibility of deportation or to go back to the prison. The bishop who said 3 months ago that he preferred prison because to lead meant to be silent, has said that he preferred to return to prison, and he has been in prison again in the same terrible room with no ventilation and who knows how many degrees of temperature. It is an example, and it is also a reason for hope. It is a reason for hope because there are still bishops, and surely many more than the case of Monsignor Alvarez. There are still bishops who are willing to give their lives for Christ. It is an example for all of us that tells us how far we have to go for love of the Lord. And it is, I repeat, the reason for hope because there are still these extraordinary fruits of the holiness in the Church. Let us not stop praying for this martyrium bishop, and let us also pray for the new prefect of the doctrine of the faith, Monsignor Fernandez, who wrote that book on the Holy Spirit, so that he may be guided by the Holy Spirit and make of the doctrine of the faith the dicastery that protects, words, and explains in the best possible way the treasure of the faith that can never be betrayed. Until next week, God willing.
We will continue to keep you informed of what is happening in the Church. In the meantime, you can check our website at www.magnificat.tv. See you next week, God willing.